Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Dean Monti.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Hi, Molly. How are you today? Thank you for
I'm
having me on the show.
I am so excited to have you on. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing?
Well, my latest published novel is called The Monosexual, published by a wonderful publisher, Madville. It's the story of Vincent Cappellini. He's a romantic idealist, and he believes he has experienced the love of his life in a way that no one has before. But abruptly, the woman in his life walks out on him and doesn't return. So he's left in this bereft state of not knowing how to continue on without her. And he needs to believe that the love was so special that there's no name for it. So he kind of pathologizes himself and makes up a quote unquote condition or name for his condition, which is monosexual. It's something that he wears as like a badge of honor, but it's also something that's kind of incurable. But it's only incurable because he made it up himself. It's like smell maxing. Have you heard that term, smell maxing?
No,
It's
I haven't.
it's it's I just read it's a term for they made up a term for teenage boys who they're not using Axe anymore. They're actually buying high-end colognes and like really smelling super yeah.
It's
So
like when they call it like look smaxing. I've seen that a lot.
okay,
And
that's another good one. Okay.
okay, yeah. Oh, that's very interesting.
No, but I love words, and I love when people create new words to describe something that they think is unique. So that's where Vincent's at. So, but it all sounds very sad, but it's told through a very absurd and mostly comic lens. And when we meet Vincent, he's in a hospital, not sure how he got there. He's checking to make sure he has all his body parts and all that. And then we learn by going back a few days in time how he got there and where he's going to go from there.
So how did you get the idea for the term of the monosexual?
There wasn't a word for it that quite matched. There's a few other words like what is this word? Demisexuality. Demisexuality is like I said, I spend all day looking up I'm on Merriam-Webster and all that. And I love looking up new words and all that. And there's a term called demisexual, which means that you can't have sex with someone until you are romantically involved with them. And this is like that sort of taken up another level. And there was no word, and I wanted it to be a word that he made up for himself because it's important that he feels set apart from everyone else on a different romantic plane than everybody else.
Yeah, I like that where it's like this is not only a condition that specifically affects me and like this super specific thing, but I am also the only person to have ever had this.
Yeah. Yes, right. Which of course, is nonsense, but Vincent believes it.
But
So
it gives you a great picture of the character.
yeah. hmm I'm sorry, what was the question?
Oh, I hadn't asked a new one yet. Actually,
Oh,
you were just answering the first one perfectly.
oh.
I was gonna say next, how did you start writing
Um, how did I start writing this one or how do I start writing in general?
in general?
I use vintage manual typewriters because I like that percussive rhythm and feedback and feel. I don't play an instrument, but a typewriter feels like a musical instrument to me. I have a vintage Remington from the 1930s, and
Oh,
it took me forever to find a typewriter that had just the right tap sound and touch. I'm a little neurotic about typewriter sounds, among other things. And I also write in journals, and I do jot down ideas, but I don't think I've ever written anything that begins with the words "idea for a novel," because I don't work that way, and I never know what it's going to be. I just write scenes, I write characters, and I immediately put them into conflict, which I think is very important. Um, It could be a smaller conflict like a work dispute, or a larger conflict like this about lost love, or Sunburn, which also is part of this book, or bad sushi or whatever. But I'm one of those writers that when I start, I don't want to know the ending. So from my very first novel on, it's been very Zen-like. I'll approach it without a preconceived idea of where it's going, and then sit down and react to it in the moment as if I'm seeing it for the first time and saying, okay, what happens next? And then sit down the next day and say, oh, okay, here's a new story. What happens next? And that's the way I do it. I'm not advising that for all writers. That's just what works for me. It's
Interesting.
yeah, it's something that has helped me develop my voice for sure, and my own particular style. Some people have different goals and different ideas of success for what a novel should be, and they need to go at it differently. For me, success comes in, gosh, like freeing myself up and leaving myself open to chance and producing a work from that. So if I stay true to that, that's my idea of success. So
I
these
love that.
just, yeah, thank you. So this is just drawing um, disparate elements together. Sometimes I'll write down one idea and then I'll look at it juxtaposed with against another idea, and it starts to take shape from there. So.
So at what point did you know that this was a novel, or at what point did you put it together into the novel
Yeah, that's a
piece?
good question. So I know that I had the idea of the monosexual, and then I needed to. You're always trying to keep your characters from. You're always trying to keep your characters unhappy for as long as you can, and keep them from achieving their goals. So a lot of that was just throwing up a lot of stuff against Vincent, the character in the book, to keep him from achieving the small things and large things that he needed to do, and his monosexuality getting in the way at the same time. So
So you mentioned before that you really love having that element of chance in there. How do
yeah.
you incorporate that into your writing?
um, in a very I just let it come to me. I don't throw any idea away that comes by. So it is kind of Zen-like in that way. I'll let ideas come and go through the transom between my ears, and see what works for me. I'm very open to including or working on something that may have happened either that very day, or a memory, or I try not to force those things. I just let them sort of come to me. And then I free associate a lot, and things come to me that way as well.
Interesting. So now you're also a playwright, correct?
Yes, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was interesting because before play I did short stories first, and then I did theater at College of DuPage for like a season and a half. It was like summer stock, so we did like a lot of different plays. And from that, from doing the same lines over and over, and it was Tennessee Williams, it was Summer and Smoke, and I had a big part in it and had to learn a lot of lines. But you do learn about rhythms and so forth in dialogue
Mhm.
by repeating the same lines over and over again and interpreting them, and giving different inflection, and you start to see rhythms in dialogue by actually doing plays. And also improv is also, I took a few improv classes at College of DuPage as well, and I think those are really good for learning how to write dialogue, and so forth. So anyway, I'd done all that. I'd done these plays, and then I found I didn't like being on stage so much, but I did like to write. So then I just started writing plays, and that went very well for me. And from there, at some point, it's a little convoluted story about how I ended up actually writing a novel, because I never ever really thought I could write a novel. I thought that would be absolutely impossible. But it was after I'd written plays that I started writing novels.
So how did you get there? I'd like to hear that. I'd like to hear that story.
Well, okay. So when I was in high school, there was this girl that I dated for like a hot second. And I took her to homecoming and then she dropped me. I think she just wanted to go to homecoming. So uh, we dated for like just about a week or so, and then she dropped me, and she said that I wasn't a good kisser, and she had a very strange idea of it. It was something like it was her head would sort of swivel around like back and forth like a turntable or something like that. And she thought that's what that was about. So cut to years later, we become very good platonic friends and nothing to do with dating or anything like that. But we became very good platonic friends. And I said, well, I've done these short stories. And she said, well, you should write a novel. And I'm like, I can't, I cannot write a novel. And she said, of course you can. Of course you can write a novel. And I thought, well, I can't be the guy that doesn't know how to kiss and the guy who can't write novels. So I rose to the challenge and thought, well, I'll just do this and see if this is something that I can do. Um, and I got better at both. So, or so I'm told. So that's that story.
It's a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing. But
Mhm.
now, from that point forward, what did your path to publication look like after you did write the book?
Well, the first part of it was actually sitting down and learning the first comes creativity and being open, and then comes the actual discipline, which as you probably know is sitting in a chair and actually being in isolation and typing. So the first novel I wrote is not the first novel I published, but the first novel I wrote, I just sat and typed and typed and typed until I had about 300 pages, just so I knew that I could physically do the act of what it took to write a novel.
Mhm.
And then I found out I enjoyed that process. I enjoy the process of typing and writing and creating. Um, and so that novel is that novel didn't go anywhere. And I brought it to a writing workshop class and it didn't really uh, land. And then I was crushed. And then very good teacher, mentor, Carol Anshaw, who was one of my favorite writers. She was teaching the class and she said, you're not on eye level with this character. And maybe suggested that I write something else. And then I did, and she and the class were very encouraging. And then I was writing like a chapter a week. And that eventually became The Sweep at the Second Hand, which was my first published novel. And then that was later published by Penguin. And I really never looked back. I've never stopped writing. So,
That is awesome. I do love that you brought up the fact that it is a discipline.
hmm.
I'm very intrigued by that idea of like writing as work because I think that a lot of times people are like, well, it's a creative field, so it's just whatever, and the book just appears. And it can be very hard to sit down and plot out that time and everything.
It is, and it can be very lonely, and sometimes it's very tempting to. I mean, there are always, no matter what level of success, however you define success, there's always the devil on your shoulder saying, "There's a really good movie I'd like you to watch right now," or the basketball finals are on tonight, or there's a
Well, we have
thousand.
phones now, so it's
Yes,
just constant. It's like you
yes.
can look at
So
anything.
yeah, so in that sense, it's very difficult to for me to not very difficult. It's often difficult for me to get to that place where I'm sitting at a desk committed to doing the work. But then once I'm in the work, then I'm fine. Then I find flow very quickly once I'm inside it.
Yes, interesting. So I'm curious, what does the editing process look like for you?
Um,
And this can be for your plays or your novels or anything.
yeah, I mean, I'll go through several drafts as it takes shape. I like to step away. That's always a good thing. Come back to it and then look at it really critically. Like I mean, like really critically. Like I'll pick it up because I taught for several years as well. I taught writing for adult learners at College of DuPage and downtown at Columbia as well. And so I would look at it as my own student paper and say, does this make sense? And I get very critical and and sometimes I go to work on something else and come back to it so it's fresh again. My first draft is always rough, but usually things that there's usually things that stay and then a lot that goes. In later drafts, I'm looking mostly for ambiguities. I'm looking for anything that would stop the reader or take the reader out of the story. Because I think that's very important. Is you can I guess that's what they call killing your darlings, because anything that you may think is sort of kind of clever or that sounds I don't want to use the word literary, but I can't think of a different word. You don't want to sound like a book too much, so
Yeah.
much that you know what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely.
So that people aren't suddenly saying I'm reading a book, or they're taken out of it by something that doesn't make sense. So those are very important to me. So um, whatever I think I can cut, I will cut. The further I go along, I write a lot up front so that I feel confident about cutting later on. So
Mhm.
I think this book, The Monosexual, works nicely in its current published form. It's probably well paced and moves along nicely because of what I was able to cut. I mean, I cut out entire chapters, but I also don't believe that any of that writing is wasted. I think you're always learning something, and writing those chapters that I cut helped me to understand why those parts didn't belong and what else did belong. So I just believe in writing it out and then really looking at it critically and coming back and saying this is not, because I think I always have an idea. That's why I don't use outlines or note cards, because it's a film and it's in my head and I know what it's supposed to look like and I know what belongs and what does not belong in this particular film in my head. So it's just a matter of getting there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is the number one thing or a few things that you would say you learned from this writing process for this novel?
Not sure I have a good answer for that one. I think I'm getting like slightly more comfortable even after all these years I've been writing with trusting my voice and trusting the process most of all. And when I can trust the process more, um, then I do more writing and get more done, because I am a firm believer that you become better by just writing, and looking back on your work and moving on and trying something else and trying whatever works. So this has helped me to also, I think with every novel I do, I stretch myself a little further. I try to see what else I can possibly do that I haven't done before. No two novels that I've written are the same. So and I don't have any genre or lane or anything. So everything's open to me.
So I'm kind of curious. This is a total 180 from what we were saying before, but what are your reading habits like?
I read mostly nonfiction. I,
Okay.
I I read a ton of fiction growing up. I always had a book and I was always wanting to go to the library when I was young and growing up. And then all throughout high school and college, I would just, I couldn't get enough books. And I still read fiction and I still love fiction. I have some of my favorite authors that I like. Um,
Oh, would you mind sharing those?
it makes me sad because my very favorite author has always been Paul Auster, and we recently lost him. Um, he died recently, and his book, The Music of Chance, really opened up my eyes to the possibilities of what fiction could do, and in a way that no other book had done. It was just one of those books that speaks to you in some way. Um, so that was important to me. Will Self is a British author that a lot of people over here maybe are not aware of. He writes very absurd novels, very edgy kind of novels, but wonderful use of language, and just again shows you just the enormous possibilities of fiction.
That is so cool. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Now, have you ever read a book that was so good that it changed the way that you write now?
I think it would be The Music of Chance. It didn't make me. I want to be clear too that it didn't make me want to be Paul Auster or to write like Paul Auster, but it made me take writing very seriously and my own craft very seriously, and made me want to develop my own voice as a writer, and do the best that I could with the tools that I have. So that was an important book for me. Um, Years ago, I mean, I don't read Bukowski anymore. He's become more of a meme than an author in some places. But Charles Bukowski was just kind of interesting because just no one was writing like that. Um, and books, I was always seeking out books that are not in the mainstream. I was very heavy into modern Japanese literature for a long time. Books like Face of Another and The Boxed Man by Kobo Abe and Mishima's books. I was just always looking for whatever, there's like two lines, and there's 100 people in one line and like three people in another line. I'm probably going to be in the shorter line trying to figure out why uh, no one is checking this out, because I'm always looking for the unusual and different.
Oh my gosh, same here, same here. And I think that a lot of our listeners feel that way too. I mean, if you're finding this podcast and everything, it's like the authors that I try to find and have on here are the ones that are really interested in finding that fascinating thing.
And Joseph Heller too. I
Mhm.
mean, I like that character in Catch 22, who is in an he knows that he's in an absurd world, and he has to make choices in spite of it, and I like characters that are caught up in these absurd worlds but retain like a hope for humanity.
Mhm.
um I think that's rubbed off on me in some way.
Now, how do you feel that that has come up in your own character creation?
um I think I'm a deeply feeling person, sometimes to my detriment, and sometimes, but mostly, I guess, I'm an empath, and I care about others. So, like when I'm in the world of these books, I really do care about these characters in a way that you care about like real people. So I get very deeply involved in the story when I'm in it. Um, and then when I move on to another book, I'm in that world. I'm not in the world of this book anymore. So yeah.
Now, when you're writing, how do you get out of the head of your character when you have to switch over onto the next book or just, I mean, your daily life?
I haven't found that separation to be too difficult. I think there's some sort of writer persona within me that it's not like a switch exactly, but I can somehow find it. And I feel like when I'm writing, I'm definitely writing in the Dean Monti persona of writer rather than the Dean Monti that's doing his daily job or making dinner or feeding the cats or whatever. So um, yeah, the cats can be a problem because they interrupt your writing quite often. So
Oh, yes. I have many times where mine has just fully blocked the screen, stood on the keyboard, writing her own novel at this point.
well, there you go. Yeah, that'll be good.
All right. Well, I have had such a fantastic time interviewing you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. Your podcast is really wonderful. I hope a lot of people will listen to it because I've learned a lot by listening to your podcast as well.
Oh, thank you. I am so glad. I have learned a lot hosting this and having all of these incredible authors on. Yeah, I just have one more question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Oh, well, I've completed other novels. So I'm like rotating between like working on those and querying on those. I did get some really good feedback on the latest thing that I've been working on. It's a novel called Feltville, Feltville, Feltville. It's a town out in the woods outside of New Jersey, and I just set a serial comic novel there and just build characters from there and but it's turned out really nicely. And then after I wrote the a few drafts of that novel, um like I said, these have all been like movies in my head, so I had never attempted a screenplay, so I worked on a screenplay, and I'm polishing that as well, based on this novel that I wrote. So I was going
Interesting.
back and forth between the two projects, um, between the screenplay, which was much more difficult than I thought it would be, because in a screenplay you can't be in the characters' heads as much as I'm used to being. You have to show a lot more and get your story across that way through the dialogue and through the actions. And you can't, unless you want to do something that I don't really like, which is like a voiceover, then you can't really get inside the heads of the characters as much as I'm used to. So that was a real challenge. But I'm really proud. I'm really happy that I did it, because it was on my bucket list to try. Because I think you should try. I, I don't have advice. I'm not prescriptive, but I really think you should try all different kinds of writing.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
I even do. I like cartooning, although I'm really bad at drawing, but I like to cartoon, and sometimes an idea will turn into that. So I never know what the next thing is going to be. I'll probably return to plays at some point too, but yeah, always working on something.
Well, that is fantastic. I hope that this book sells so well and that people buy it. Anyone listening to this, please go out and support anything that Dean is doing in the future. And I hope you have amazing luck with your screenplay and any books in the future.
Thank you, Molly. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure to have you on, and you are welcome back anytime. For anyone listening to this, I have had a cold all day, so if I seem a little off, that is why. But I'd love to have you on when I am not
Can I
sick.
tell you, can I tell you, Molly, hot lemonade is very good for a cold. You should get some hot lemonade and honey and try that. It's very good for your throat.
I will be trying that as soon as we get off this call. Thank
Okay.
you.
I hope you feel better.
For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Dean Monti.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.